The desert didn't forgive mistakes. Cade Mercer understood this the way some men understood scripture. Not from reading, but from living it, bleeding it, burying friends in it. He'd crossed this particular stretch of wasteland 3 times before, always at night, always alone. The kind of crossing that left you either harder or dead, lost. Crossing sat like a scab on the landscape, a trading post that existed because men needed somewhere to water horses and lie about where they'd been. The structure itself was an insult to architecture. Warped planks held together by spite and desert varnish, a roof that leaked more than it covered, and a sign so sun-bleached you couldn't read the name unless you already knew it. Cade approached on foot, leading his roan mare by the reins. The horse was tired but not spent, and he'd need her fresh if things went the way he suspected. 200 yards out, he stopped. The sun hung low and mean, turning everything the color of old blood. Wind pushed dust devils across the flats, and somewhere a hawk screamed, furious at the heat. Cade stood motionless, reading the scene the way a card sharp reads a deck. 4 horses tied outside. Maybe 5. One was blocked by the water trough. That was 3 more than usual for this time of day. His eyes moved to the roof. The access hatch, normally shut to keep the heat down, stood propped open. Someone would be up there, probably with a rifle. The windows were dark, but not empty. He could feel weight behind them, the particular quality of stillness that came from men holding their breath, waiting for a target to walk into range. Cade's face didn't change. He'd learned a long time ago that fear was just information, and information kept you alive. He adjusted his hat, checked the Colt at his hip, loosened the holster the way it needed to be, and started walking again. The mare nickered softly. He touched her neck, fingers light. "I know, girl," he said quietly. "I know." 24 hours earlier, he'd been 60 miles north, sleeping under a rock shelf that barely deserved the name shelter. He'd woken to find a piece of paper weighted down with a stone near his saddle. A wanted notice. His face stared back at him from the sketch, accurate enough to be dangerous, vague enough that he might slip past a lazy lawman. But it wasn't the image that caught his attention. It was the number beneath it, $5,000, dead or alive. Cade had folded the paper carefully, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and sat watching the sunrise while he worked through the implications. $5,000 wasn't law money. Sheriffs and marshals didn't have that kind of budget, not for a man whose only real crime was being hard to kill and harder to buy. This was private money, personal money, the kind of bounty that turned every gun hand and desperate fool within 300 miles into a hunter. He'd known then that Lost Crossing was compromised. The owner, a man called Fletcher, who asked too many questions and remembered too many faces, would have been the first contact point for anyone tracking Cade's route. Fletcher wasn't brave enough to set a trap himself, but he'd absolutely sell information to the highest bidder, then act surprised when bodies started piling up in his establishment. So Cade had made a choice that seemed insane to anyone who didn't understand the mathematics of violence. He'd ride straight in, because men expecting a cautious target got sloppy. They relaxed. They assumed. And assumptions got you killed. Now, walking toward the trading post with the certainty of ambush settling around him like a familiar coat, Cade ran calculations. 4 horses meant probably 6 men. 2 would have doubled up to save on mounts and split the bounty fewer ways. 1 on the roof, confirmed. 2 inside by the windows, likely. That left 3 mobile, probably positioned to cover the back door and the blind spot near the supply shed. Professional work. Not random drifters hoping for luck, which meant someone had organized this. Someone with resources and reach. The name clicked into place like a round sliding into a chamber. Vernon Hale. Of course it was Hale. 3 months back, Cade had made the mistake of being in the wrong place with a functioning conscience. He'd watched Hale's men, legal in title only, force a family off land they'd worked for 20 years. The paperwork was fake, the deed was forged, and the county judge was in Hale's pocket deep enough to taste leather. The family had nowhere to go. No money for lawyers, no leverage except the sweat they'd poured into that dirt. Cade had intervened. Not dramatically. He didn't ride in with guns blazing or make speeches about justice. He'd simply positioned himself between Hale's men and the family, made it clear that taking the land would cost more than it was worth, and waited to see who'd blink first. Hale's foreman, a man named Cutler with a reputation for violence and a complete absence of imagination, had gone for his gun. He'd been fast, too, almost fast enough. The bullet had shattered Cutler's shoulder instead of his heart, which was more mercy than the situation required. But Cade wasn't in the business of creating martyrs. A wounded man told a better story than a corpse. It kept the legend useful and the fear specific. Hale had pulled back. The family kept their land, and now, apparently, Hale wanted a different kind of satisfaction. Cade reached the hitching post, tied his mare loose, she'd pull free if things went loud, and walked toward the entrance. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, gap-toothed and scarred from a decade of boots and bad weather. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was exactly what it pretended to be, a room full of shadows and the smell of stale tobacco, spilled whiskey, and unwashed men. Shelves lined 2 walls stocked with goods nobody wanted and a few things people needed. The counter ran along the back, and behind it, Fletcher stood with his hands flat on the wood, his face doing a terrible job of looking relaxed. "Mercer," Fletcher said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "Didn't expect to see you." "Sure you didn't." Cade's eyes had already mapped the room. 2 men by the east window, trying to look casual and failing. One near the stove, hand hovering too close to his belt. Another at the corner table, pretending to clean his rifle, but really just keeping it ready. 4 visible, plus the roof. 5 confirmed. That left 1 unaccounted for. Back room, probably. We're outside near the well. Fletcher licked his lips. You need supplies? Information. I don't... The bounty, Cade said, cutting him off. Who placed it? Fletcher's eyes darted toward the man at the corner table, just for a second. But a second was enough. Cade shifted his weight slightly, angling so his back wasn't fully exposed to any one shooter. The movement looked natural, just a man settling into a conversation. But it put him in position to draw and fire in 3 directions without adjusting his stance. I don't know what you're talking about, Fletcher managed. Vernon Hale, Cade said. Not a question. He's paying you to set this up. How much did he offer? Mercer, I swear... How much? The silence stretched thin. Somewhere above them, floorboards creaked. The man on the roof shifting position. Fletcher's resolve crumbled like wet paper. 200, just for passing word when you came through. I'm not part of the rest of it. The rest of it being the 5 men waiting to collect $5,000 for putting me in the ground. 6, Fletcher whispered. There's 6. Cade nodded slowly. Where's the last one? Barn, covering the horses in case you rabbit. Smart. Trap the exit, control the escape route, force the target into a kill box with no good options. The problem, for them, was that Cade had stopped looking for good options years ago. He'd learned to work with bad ones, turn them into weapons, make the geometry of violence work in directions his enemies didn't expect. They want me alive? Cade asked. Fletcher hesitated, then nodded. Preferably. Hale's orders. Says there's a bonus if they bring you in breathing. That was interesting. Dead men didn't talk, didn't negotiate, didn't provide leverage. Alive meant Hale wanted something more than revenge. Information, maybe. Or insurance against something Cade didn't even know he possessed. What's Hale afraid of? Cade asked. I don't. Yes, you do. A man doesn't put 5,000 on another man's head just because of injured pride. What's Hale protecting? Fletcher's face went pale. There's something happening. A deal. Big one. Railroad surveyors came through last month, and Hale's been buying up land all along the proposed route. If people find out before the official announcement, the prices jump. He needs clean titles, no disputes, no witnesses who saw him forge deeds and terrorize families off their property. Mercer, please. I got nothing to do with that. You run a trap, Cade said flatly. You take money to sell out men who trusted you enough to water their horses here. Don't dress it up as something else. One of the men by the window shifted. His hand dropped toward his gun. Cade didn't look at him directly, but his voice cut across the room like a blade. You pull that. You die first. Then your friend. Then the man at the stove. I'll take the shoulder wound from whoever's on the roof, kill the one at the table, and probably bleed out before the 6th man makes it in from the barn. That's 5 corpses and 1 witness, and Hale gets nothing but a pile of bodies and no bounty. You want to be the first one in that pile, go ahead and finish the draw. The man's hand froze. Nobody breathed. Fletcher looked like he might vomit. Cade turned his attention back to him. Here's what happens next. You're going to tell these men that Hale's using them, that the bounty's real, but the information isn't, that I didn't come here by accident. I came here because this is where Hale wanted me, and when men go where Vernon Hale wants them, they end up as problems that need burying. That's not true. The bounty's good. Hale's got the money. Sure he does. But tell me, Fletcher, how's he planning to pay 6 men $5,000 when he only promised one payday? You think they're going to split it even? You think professional guns work on shares and handshakes? Fletcher's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The man at the corner table spoke for the first time. His voice was low, textured with whiskey and old cigarettes. He's stalling, trying to get in our heads. Maybe, Cade said. Or maybe I'm pointing out that you're about to kill each other over money that doesn't exist in the amount you think it does. Hale told you 5,000, right? Probably told each of you individually, made you think you were the primary, and everyone else was backup. Classic play. Gets more guns in position, costs him nothing, and he only pays out to whoever's left standing at the end, if that's anybody. Shut your mouth, the man at the table said. But there was uncertainty in his eyes now, a seed of doubt. Cade pressed. What's your name? None of your concern. I'll call you Table then. Table, you ever worked for Hale before? Silence. That's what I thought. You're hired help, brought in special, which means the only person here who's actually talked to Hale directly is Fletcher. And Fletcher just admitted he's getting $200 for intelligence. $200. You think a man paying $200 for a tip is going to hand over $5,000 to a stranger? The man by the stove spoke up, voice tight. We got contracts, papers. Written by who? Hale's lawyers? The same lawyers who forged land deeds? The room shifted. Not physically, but the air changed. Men who'd been focused on Cade started glancing at each other, running their own calculations, wondering who'd get the money and who'd get a bullet in the back once the work was done. Cade had learned this a long time ago. You didn't win fights by being the fastest gun. You won by being the smartest, by turning allies into enemies, by making men question everything right before they needed certainty the most. Fletcher found his voice again. Mercer's lying. He's just I'm trying to stay alive, Cade interrupted. Same as them. Difference is, I know Hale's game. You want to test my theory? Fine. Take me in. Deliver me to Hale's ranch, collect your money, and see what happens when you ask for the full $5,000 in cash. See if Hale smiles and pays, or if his men are already positioned to make sure you don't leave the property breathing. Table stood slowly. His rifle came with him, not aimed, but ready. Enough talk, he said. We got a job. We do it. The man by the window moved at the same time, and Cade knew the decision point had arrived. Words only carried you so far. After that, it was speed and accuracy and the willingness to live with consequences. He didn't draw. Not yet. One more thing, Cade said quietly. Before this goes where it's going. Fletcher, who hired you to pass the information? I told you, Hale's people. Name. Cutler. Hale's foreman, the one you shot. Cade nodded slowly. That tracked. Cutler would want this personal, would want to be involved in the collection, maybe even the delivery, which meant he was probably close. Maybe not in the building, but nearby, watching, waiting to see if his trap worked. Cutler here? Cade asked. Fletcher shook his head too quickly. No, he's back at the ranch. Liar. Table, Cade said. Check the barn. Why the hell would I? Because if Cutler's out there instead of the 6th man you're expecting, it means this whole thing is a setup. It means Hale never intended to pay you at all. It means you're all expendable, and the real plan is for Cutler to put bullets in whoever's left standing after you kill me. Then he takes the credit, gets the promotion, and you get buried in unmarked graves behind a trading post nobody cares about. Table's eyes narrowed. He looked at the man by the stove, then at Fletcher. Who'd you say was in the barn? Table asked. Fletcher's face went white. Riker. Man named Riker. Describe him. Tall. Dark coat. Hair? Fletcher stammered. It was dark. Table moved fast, crossing to the window in 3 strides. He peered out toward the barn, then went very still. That ain't Riker, he said quietly. That's Cutler. The room exploded into motion. The man by the stove drew first, not on Cade, but on Fletcher, pure rage driving the movement. Fletcher screamed, ducking behind the counter. The man at the window spun, rifle coming up, trying to track multiple targets. Table was already moving toward the door, cursing, his rifle pointed at the barn. And Cade, in the chaos, in the perfect moment of distraction and confusion, drew his Colt and put a bullet through the roof. The man above screamed and crashed through the hatch, hitting the floor hard, his rifle clattering away. Cade was already moving, diving behind a shelf as gunfire erupted. The man by the stove fired at Fletcher and missed, the round punching through bottles on the back wall. Fletcher returned fire with a shotgun that appeared from under the counter, the blast catching the stove man in the chest and throwing him backward into the wall. Table hit the door, threw it open, and took a rifle round in the leg from the barn. He went down hard, still firing, his shots chewing into the barn's door frame. Return fire came fast and heavy, and Cade recognized the rhythm. Cutler's work, controlled bursts, professional spacing. The window man swung his rifle toward Cade's position, but Cade was faster. 2 shots, center mass. The man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. 4 down. Cutler in the barn. 1 unaccounted for. Cade heard boot falls behind him, spun, and fired in the same motion. The round caught the man from the back room in the shoulder, spinning him, but not dropping him. He fired back, wild shot that missed by a foot, and Cade's second round took him in the throat. 5 down. Cutler remained. The gunfire stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space, broken only by Table's groaning near the door, and the wet, horrible sounds of the roofman trying to breathe with collapsed lungs. Cade reloaded, movements automatic, fingers steady. His heart rate hadn't changed. This wasn't his first ambush, wasn't his 10th, and the adrenaline had learned years ago that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Cutler," he called out, "you want to finish this or you want to ride back to Hale and tell him his $5,000 trap cost him 6 men and got him nothing?" No response from the barn. Fletcher was crying behind the counter, making small animal sounds of terror. Table had gone quiet, either unconscious or smart enough to play dead. Cade waited, counting seconds, watching the barn through the gap in the wall where a window used to be. 30 seconds. 60. Then hoofbeats, fast and fading. Cutler was running. Cade moved to the door, staying low, gun ready. He could see dust rising from the far side of the barn, a horse pushed to full gallop, heading south toward the border. Not running away. Running to report. Cade holstered his Colt and turned back to the carnage inside the trading post. 5 bodies, Fletcher still breathing, still crying. Table's leg was bleeding bad, tourniquet level bad, but he'd live if someone cared enough to help him. Cade didn't. He walked to the counter, grabbed a canteen and a box of ammunition, and dropped $2 silver on the blood-stained wood. "For the supplies," he said to Fletcher. Then he walked out, untied his mare, and swung into the saddle. The sun was climbing now, heat building toward something vicious. He turned the horse south, following Cutler's trail, reading the story written in hoofprints and desperate speed. This wasn't over. It was just starting, because Hale had made a critical mistake. He'd tried to trap Cade, tried to control the situation, tried to turn money and men into a solution. But Cade didn't solve the same way other men did. He didn't run, didn't hide, didn't wait for the next attack. He became the attack. And somewhere ahead, Cutler was riding toward Hale with news that would change everything. The trap had failed, the men were dead, and Cade Mercer was no longer the hunted. The mare moved into an easy lope, eating distance, following the trail south into territory where law meant nothing, and men settled disputes with guns and graves. Cade's face showed nothing, no anger, no satisfaction. Just the cold, focused expression of a man who'd made a decision and would see it through to whatever end waited on the other side of the border. The desert spread out before him, endless and unforgiving. He rode into it without hesitation. Behind him, Lost Crossing smoldered in the heat, another landmark of violence in a landscape built on blood and broken promises. Ahead, the real war was just beginning. The border was a line that existed on maps and nowhere else. Cade crossed it 3 hours after leaving Lost Crossing, marked only by a dried creek bed and a cairn of stones some optimistic surveyor had stacked decades ago. The rocks had tumbled, scattered by weather and indifference, and now they looked like broken teeth jutting from the earth. South of the line, things operated differently. Towns had names but no mayors. Justice was a personal matter settled with whatever tools you had handy. The kind of place where a man could disappear completely or build an empire, depending on how much violence he was willing to commit and how smart he was about committing it. Vernon Hale understood this geography intimately. Cutler's trail led straight through the wasteland, cutting across alkali flats that shimmered with heat devils and false water. The hoofprints were deep, uneven. A horse pushed too hard, rider not caring about the cost. Desperation tracks. The kind that said a man was more afraid of what was behind him than what lay ahead. Cade kept the mare to a sustainable pace. No point in killing a good horse to catch a bad man. Cutler wasn't going anywhere that mattered, and speed wasn't the advantage here. Patience was. The sun hammered down like a physical thing, turning the air thick and hostile. Cade's canteen was half empty by noon, and he rationed the water carefully, giving the mare most of it. She'd earned the priority. Without her, he was just another corpse waiting to happen in country that specialized in making corpses. By early afternoon, the landscape shifted. The flats gave way to broken terrain, arroyos cut deep by flash floods that came once a year and killed anything stupid enough to be in the way. Mesquite and creosote clung to existence in the draws, and occasionally Cade spotted the white bones of cattle or horses that had tried to cross during the wrong season. The trail turned east, following high ground, and Cade knew where Cutler was heading. Refuge. There was a town, generous word for it, about 15 miles south of the border. No official name, but people called it Crucible because it was where men either hardened or melted down to nothing. It was where Hale's kind did their business away from witnesses and legal complications, where men could be bought, sold, or buried without paperwork. Cutler would go there. Report to whoever Hale had positioned as his representative. Get instructions on the next move. And Cade would be waiting. The sun was angling toward evening when Cade spotted the first signs of settlement, smoke from cook fires rising thin and gray against the darker sky. He slowed the mare, scanning the terrain ahead. The town sat in a shallow basin, protected from wind but vulnerable to anyone with high ground and bad intentions. Cade didn't ride in directly. Instead, he circled wide, coming in from the east where the land rose slightly and gave him a view of the main street. He tied the mare in a stand of scraggly cottonwoods near a dried spring, checked his weapons, and moved in on foot. The town was exactly what he expected, a collection of structures that looked like they'd been assembled from the wreckage of better places. Adobe walls held together with hope and horse manure, corrugated metal roofs that sang in the wind and leaked in the rain, a saloon that doubled as a general store, a livery that smelled like death and hay in equal measure, and a scattering of shacks where people slept when they couldn't afford to drink anymore. Maybe 70 people on a good day. Twice that when the outlaws and gun runners came through to trade. Cade spotted Cutler's horse tied outside the saloon. The animal looked finished, head hanging low, flanks heaving. Cutler had run it nearly to death getting here. That kind of panic was useful information. It meant Cutler was scared enough to stop thinking clearly, and scared men made mistakes. Cade found a position on the roof of an abandoned supply shack, 20 yards from the saloon with clear lines of sight to the entrance. He settled in to wait, patient as stone, watching the flow of people and reading the rhythms of the town. An hour passed, then 2. The sun touched the horizon, bleeding red across the desert, and men started emerging from wherever they'd been hiding from the heat. The saloon's doors opened and closed, voices drifting out along with the smell of cheap tequila and cheaper tobacco. Cutler appeared just as full dark settled in. He wasn't alone. 3 men walked with him, and Cade recognized the type immediately. Professional guns. Not the Lost Crossing variety, desperate men hoping for a score. These were the real thing, men who killed for wages and slept fine afterward. They moved with the kind of casual confidence that came from winning more fights than they'd lost, and their weapons weren't for show. They stood outside the saloon talking low. Cade couldn't hear the words, but he read the body language. Cutler was explaining, gesturing back north toward the border. One of the professionals kept shaking his head, clearly unimpressed. Another lit a cigarette and looked bored. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. Then money changed hands. Cutler passing a leather pouch to the tallest of the 3 men. A down payment. Proof that Hale was serious and the job was legitimate. The professionals took the money and walked toward the livery. Cutler went back inside the saloon. Cade waited another 30 minutes, making sure the pattern held, then climbed down from the roof and moved through the shadows toward the saloon's back entrance. The door hung loose on its hinges, opening into a narrow hallway that smelled like piss and vomit. Voices filtered through the thin walls, men arguing about cards, a woman laughing too loud at something that wasn't funny, the clink of bottles and glasses. He found Cutler in a back room, sitting alone at a table with a bottle and a single glass. The room was barely large enough for the furniture it contained. Table, 2 chairs, a cot shoved against the wall. A lamp burned low, throwing shadows that made Cutler's face look hollow and ancient. Cade stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Cutler's hand went to his gun, but Cade already had his Colt out, aimed center mass, finger on the trigger. "Don't," Cade said quietly. Cutler froze. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, and behind the fear there was something else. Resignation, maybe? Or relief that the waiting was over. "Mercer," Cutler said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. "Should have known you'd follow. Should have known a lot of things. Like how sending 6 men to collect 1 bounty was going to end in bodies." Cutler's hand moved away from his gun, slowly, and he picked up the glass instead. He drank, throat working, then set it down with a shaking hand. "Wasn't supposed to go that way," he said. "Never is. But it did. Now 5 men are dead, 1's bleeding out in Lost Crossing, and you're here hiring replacements. That the plan? Keep throwing bodies at the problem until I run out of bullets? Hale's orders." "Hale's orders," Cade repeated flatly. "You take orders from a man who uses you like ammunition? That sit right with you?" Cutler laughed, bitter and broken. "What sits right doesn't matter anymore. I got a job. I do it, or I'm next." "Next for what?" "The hole. Same one they'll put you in when this is done." Cade pulled out the second chair and sat down. Gun still trained on Cutler, but posture relaxed. Conversational. Like they were old friends catching up instead of 2 men balanced on the edge of killing each other. "Talk to me about Hale," Cade said. "Why? You already know what he is. I know he's rich. I know he steals land. I know he's got judges and lawmen in his pocket. What I don't know is why he wants me alive badly enough to put 5,000 on my head with specific instructions not to kill me if it can be avoided." Cutler poured another drink, hands steadier now. He studied the glass like it contained answers instead of rot gut tequila. "You embarrassed him," Cutler said finally. "In front of people who matter, people he does business with. Word got around that some nobody drifter stood up to Vernon Hale and walked away intact. That's a problem. That's ego. Ego doesn't cost $5,000. It does when it threatens a deal worth 10 times that." There it was. The shape of the thing. Cade leaned forward slightly. "Fletcher mentioned a railroad." Cutler nodded. "Survey crews came through 2 months ago. Official route won't be announced for another 6 months. But Hale's got people inside. He knows where the line's going. He's been buying up every piece of land along the corridor, legally when he can, illegally when he can't. And if people find out the route before the announcement, prices jump, high enough that Hale loses money instead of making it. He needs clean titles, no disputes, no families claiming fraud, no witnesses who saw how he acquired the property. Witnesses like me. You and about a dozen others, most of them already bought off or scared off. You're the only one who shot back." Cade absorbed this, fitting pieces together. "So the bounty isn't about revenge. It's about control. He needs me to disappear, but he needs it to look legitimate, legal. And if he can bring me in alive, he can make me sign something. A statement saying I was mistaken about what I saw, or a confession to crimes I didn't commit that discredits anything I might say later. Something like that. And if I don't cooperate?" Cutler's face went hard. "Then you disappear anyway. Just takes longer and hurts more." The room fell quiet except for the muffled noise from the saloon. Somewhere a woman was singing, off-key and sad, about a lover who'd left on a train and never came back. "Those 3 men you just hired," Cade said. "What'd you tell them?" "The truth. That you're dangerous, that you killed a team at Lost Crossing, and that Hale's willing to pay premium for results." "How much premium?" "7,000. Split 3 ways if they bring you in breathing. 4,000 if you're dead but identifiable." Cade smiled without humor. "Price went up." "You earned it. Hale's scared now. He thought Lost Crossing would be simple, clean. When I showed up and told him what happened, he—" Cutler trailed off, remembering something that clearly hadn't been pleasant. "He blamed you," Cade finished. "Of course he did. Everything's always someone else's fault with men like Hale. I'm the foreman. I was supposed to make it work. Doesn't matter that I told him 6 men wasn't enough. Doesn't matter that I said you'd see it coming. He wanted results, and I didn't deliver. So now you're here, spending his money, hiring better guns, hoping round 2 goes different than round 1. Cutler nodded slowly. What else am I supposed to do? I ride back empty-handed again. He'll put a bullet in me himself. At least this way I got a chance. A chance to get more people killed. They're professionals. They know the risks. Do they know you're working for a man who won't pay if he doesn't have to? That Hale's whole strategy is to make people expendable? Cutler's jaw tightened. I told them the bounty's real. That's all they need to know. Cade studied him for a long moment, reading exhaustion and fear, and the particular kind of desperation that came from being trapped between bad options with no way out. You don't have to keep doing this, Cade said quietly. Cutler laughed again, sharper this time. What am I supposed to do? Walk away? Start over? I'm 43 years old, got a bullet in my shoulder that didn't heal right, and the only skill I got is hurting people for money. There's no walking away from that. There's just different bosses and different graves. There's telling the truth, testifying about the land fraud, giving a statement to a federal marshal about Hale's operation. And then what? Hale's got connections all the way to the territorial capital. He'd have me killed before I made it to a courtroom. Even if I survived long enough to testify, what do you think happens to a man who rats on Vernon Hale? I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the knife or the poison or the accident that ain't an accident. Better than dying for a man who sees you as a tool. Maybe, maybe not. At least this way I know the terms. Cade let the silence stretch, then stood. His gun never wavered. Those 3 professionals, he said. Where are they now? Livery, getting their horses ready. They'll ride out at first light, head north, try to pick up your trail. They won't find it, because I'm not running. Cutler's eyes widened slightly. You're going after Hale directly. Someone needs to, and it might as well be the man he's already paying $7,000 to catch. That's suicide. Hale's ranch is a fortress, 20 men minimum, all loyal, all armed. You won't make it past the front gate. Probably not, Cade agreed. But I'll make enough noise that people notice, that the railroad people notice. And when they start asking questions about why Vernon Hale is starting a private war over a drifter who embarrassed him, they're going to look closer at those land titles, at those forged deeds, at the families he terrorized. Cutler shook his head slowly. You're insane. Just practical. I can run, and he hunts me forever. Or I can make him the target, force him to react, turn his own strategy against him. It won't work. Maybe, but it'll be interesting finding out. Cade moved to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Those professionals. You planning to tell them I was here? Cutler considered this question, turning it over. Finally, he shook his head. No. Figure you'll handle them yourself when the time comes. I'm done sending people to die. Good choice. Mercer, Cutler said as Cade opened the door. Why didn't you kill me? At Lost Crossing. You had the shot. Clean and easy. Why let me run? Cade glanced back. Because dead men can't deliver messages, and I needed Hale to know I was coming. He stepped into the hallway and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Cutler alone with his bottle and the weight of decisions he could never take back. Outside, the night had settled in completely. Stars burned overhead, distant and cold, providing just enough light to navigate by. Cade moved through the town like a ghost, avoiding the main street, keeping to the spaces between buildings where the darkness pooled thick and concealing. He found the livery without trouble. The 3 professionals were inside, exactly where Cutler had said they'd be, checking gear and discussing strategy in low voices. Cade positioned himself near a window, listening. Tracks north from Lost Crossing, one was saying. Follow them to wherever he's holed up. Can't have gone far on a tired horse. Assumes he's running, another replied. Cutler said this one doesn't follow standard patterns. They all run eventually, just a matter of pressure and patience. 7,000 says we don't have time for patience. Hale wants results fast. Then we work smart. Split up, cover more ground. First one who spots him signals the others. We converge, overwhelm him with numbers. Worked real well at Lost Crossing. Those weren't professionals. Those were desperate idiots who thought a bounty meant easy money. We know better. Cade had heard enough. He pulled back from the window, considering options. He could take them now, 3 shots, maybe 4 if one got lucky and found cover fast enough. But gunfire would wake the town, bring attention he didn't need, and complicate the larger plan forming in his mind. Better to let them go north, waste time chasing ghosts, while he went south to the real target. He returned to where he'd left the mare, checked her over, gave her the last of the water from his canteen. She nuzzled his shoulder, patient and trusting, and he felt the familiar pang of guilt that came from dragging an innocent animal into human violence. "Sorry, girl," he said quietly. "Few more days and this will be done. Then you can rest proper." The mare snorted softly, unconvinced. Cade swung into the saddle and turned south, away from the border, deeper into territory where Hale's influence ran strongest. The land opened up gradually, the broken terrain giving way to rolling hills covered in tough grass and scattered juniper. This was cattle country when the rain cooperated, and worthless dust when it didn't. Hale's ranch lay another 40 miles south, positioned strategically near a river that ran year-round. Good water meant good grass, meant good cattle, meant money and power. Simple mathematics that Hale had turned into an empire. Cade rode through the night, pushing the mare harder than he liked but needing distance and position before sunrise. By dawn, he'd covered 20 miles and found a position in the hills overlooking the river valley. He spent the day watching the ranch through a small brass telescope he'd taken off a dead Army scout 3 years back. The property sprawled across maybe 2,000 acres, with the main house sitting on high ground like a castle. Barns, corrals, bunkhouses, all arranged with defensive thinking. A man could hold that position against significant force if he had enough guns and ammunition. Hale had both. Cade counted movement, tracked patterns, identified weak points. The hands worked in shifts, which meant someone was always awake and armed. Guards rotated through positions that covered all approaches. Supply wagons came and went on a schedule that suggested organization and preparation. This wasn't just a ranch, it was a command center. As afternoon bled toward evening, Cade spotted something interesting. A rider came in from the north, not one of the ranch hands, someone else. Dressed too well, horse too expensive. He went directly to the main house, stayed for maybe an hour, then rode out again heading east. A visitor. Someone important enough to meet with Hale personally. Cade filed the information away and continued watching. Knowledge was ammunition, and he was loading up for a war he knew he couldn't win by traditional means. Night fell again, and Cade made his way closer, leaving the mare hidden in a draw with enough grass and water to keep her comfortable. He moved on foot, crossing open ground in darkness, using terrain and shadow for cover. He reached the outer fence line 2 hours before midnight. The ranch complex was lit by lanterns hung at strategic points, creating pools of light separated by darkness. Cade stayed in the dark sections, patient and methodical, working his way toward the bunkhouse where the hired guns slept. He wasn't here to start a fight. Not yet. He was here to understand the battlefield, to learn the enemy's rhythms and routines, to find the cracks in Hale's fortress. A guard passed within 10 feet of Cade's position, rifle slung casually over his shoulder, clearly bored with the duty. Cade could have killed him easily. One shot, suppressed sound, body hidden before anyone noticed. But killing a bored guard accomplished nothing except alerting Hale that someone had breached the perimeter. Better to gather intelligence and withdraw. He spent 3 hours ghosting through the ranch, memorizing layouts, counting men, identifying where weapons and ammunition were stored. The main house was locked tight, guards on the doors, no easy access. But the bunkhouse had vulnerabilities, windows that didn't close properly, a back door with a broken latch, gaps in the guard rotation. Useful information for later. As midnight approached, Cade withdrew the same way he'd come in, slow and careful, leaving no trace of his presence. By the time he reached the mare, his mind was working through scenarios and probabilities, calculating risks against potential gains. A straight assault was suicide. Hale had too many guns, too much defensive advantage. But a smart attack, something that forced Hale to react instead of dictate terms, that might work. Cade mounted up and rode back to his observation point in the hills. He'd sleep a few hours, then continue planning. War wasn't won in single battles. It was won through attrition, psychology, and making your enemy waste resources chasing solutions that didn't exist. Vernon Hale thought he was hunting Cade Mercer. He was about to learn different. The next morning brought clouds. Rare this time of year, probably wouldn't amount to rain, but at least they cut the brutal edge off the sun. Cade used the diffused light to survey the eastern approach to the ranch, the direction that visitor had ridden yesterday. A road, barely more than a track, wound through the hills toward what looked like another property in the distance. Probably a neighbor, someone doing business with Hale. Worth investigating. Cade followed the road, staying off it, but parallel, watching for traffic. Around noon, he spotted another rider coming from the east. Same type as yesterday, well-dressed, expensive horse, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged in this territory. Cade let the rider pass, then circled back to examine the tracks. Fresh, purposeful, heading straight to Hale's ranch. 2 visitors in 2 days, both from the same direction. That wasn't random. Cade pushed east, following the road for another hour until he crested a rise and saw what lay beyond, a railroad survey camp. Tents arranged in neat rows, equipment stacked in organized piles, men moving with the efficiency of a military operation. At the center, a larger tent flew a flag, some company logo Cade didn't recognize. This was it, the source. The railroad people Hale was working with, feeding information to, probably paying for advance notice on route decisions. Cade dismounted and watched from cover. The camp was too organized to infiltrate, too visible to approach without being seen. But he didn't need to get inside. He just needed to understand the connection. As he watched, another rider left the camp heading west, toward Hale's ranch. 3 visitors in as many days. Whatever deal Hale was working, it was active, happening now, which meant the timeline was compressed. Hale needed those clean land titles immediately, not in 6 months when the official announcement came, which meant Cade's leverage was time. If he could delay Hale, complicate the deal, force scrutiny on the transactions before they were finalized, the whole scheme collapsed. Hale's fortune depended on secrecy and speed. Take away either one and the railroad people would distance themselves, afraid of scandal and legal complications. Cade smiled without warmth. He'd found the strategy. Now he just needed to survive long enough to execute it. The plan took shape over the next 2 days while Cade watched the railroad camp and Hale's ranch like a man studying chess positions. He slept in 2-hour intervals, ate jerky that tasted like leather, and let his beard grow because shaving required water he couldn't spare. The mare grazed on tough grass and seemed content enough, which was more than Cade could say for himself. By the 3rd morning, he'd identified the pattern. A railroad representative, same man each time, tall with a gray beard and expensive boots, rode to Hale's ranch every afternoon around 3 o'clock. Stayed for exactly 90 minutes. Left with documents in a leather satchel that he carried like it contained something more valuable than paper. Those documents were the key. Land titles, transfer papers, whatever proof Hale was manufacturing to show clean ownership of property he'd stolen. The railroad man was either complicit or ignorant, and Cade didn't particularly care which. What mattered was that the exchange was predictable, and predictable meant vulnerable. Cade positioned himself along the road between the railroad camp and Hale's ranch, in a spot where the track narrowed between 2 rock formations. Good cover, limited escape routes for anyone passing through, and far enough from both locations that gunfire wouldn't immediately bring reinforcements. He arrived before dawn, settled into position behind a cluster of boulders that gave him clear sightlines in both directions, and waited. Patience wasn't something Cade had learned. It was something that had kept him alive long enough to learn everything else. The sun climbed, heat built. A lizard investigated Cade's boot, decided he wasn't food or threat, and moved on to more interesting rocks. At 2:45, dust rose in the east. The railroad man, right on schedule. Cade checked his Colt, made sure the rounds were seated properly, then stood and walked into the middle of the road. No cover, no concealment. Just a man standing in the open like he had every right to be there. The rider spotted him from 100 yards out and slowed. Not stopping, just cautious, hand drifting toward the rifle scabbarded on his saddle. 50 yards. 40. 30. The rider pulled up, horse dancing sideways, clearly unhappy about the situation. "Move," the railroad man said. His voice carried the particular authority of someone used to being obeyed. "You're blocking the road." "I know," Cade said. "Then move, or I'll move you." Cade smiled without warmth. "You're welcome to try. But before you do, I'd suggest you look around and ask yourself if I'm the kind of man who stands in the middle of a road alone unless I'm very sure of the outcome." The railroad man's eyes narrowed. He did look around, scanning the rocks, the high ground, searching for the ambush he assumed must be there. There wasn't one. Just Cade. But the railroad man didn't know that, and uncertainty was its own kind of weapon. "What do you want?" the man asked. "Conversation. About Vernon Hale and the land you're helping him steal." The railroad man's face went carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. That's why you ride to his ranch every day with an empty satchel and leave with it full. That's why you take the same route at the same time, predictable as a train schedule. You're either the most dedicated surveyor in history, or you're part of something that's going to blow up in your face the moment people start asking questions." "Those are serious accusations." "They're about to get more serious. Tell me your name." The railroad man hesitated, then seemed to decide cooperation was safer than confrontation. "Marcus Webb, Chief Surveyor for Continental and Pacific Railroad. And you are?" "The man who's about to make your job a lot more complicated. Those documents in your satchel, they're land titles, right? Properties Hale's acquired along your proposed route?" Webb's hand tightened on the reins. "That's confidential company business. It's fraud. Hale's been forcing families off their land, forging deeds, using violence and intimidation to clear the corridor before your company announces the official route. He's betting that once you go public, the land values will spike, and he can sell to you at inflated prices. Clean profit built on theft." Those are strong claims. Do you have proof?" "I have 5 dead bodies at a trading post called Lost Crossing. I have families who will testify if anyone bothers to ask. And I have the fact that you're carrying documents you won't let me see, which suggests you already know something's wrong, but you're choosing to ignore it because it's easier than dealing with the consequences." Webb's face flushed. "You don't know anything about my situation. I know you're risking your career and possibly your freedom by participating in this. I know that when federal investigators start looking into Hale's land acquisitions, and they will, I'll make sure of it, they're going to find your name all over the paperwork. And I know that being complicit in fraud carries the same penalties as committing it yourself." "I'm not complicit in anything." "Then prove it. Open the satchel. Show me what you're carrying." Webb's jaw worked, grinding through options. Finally he said, "Even if what you're saying is true, what am I supposed to do? Hale's already made the deals. The company's already committed resources based on his assurances. If I raise concerns now, the entire project gets delayed, maybe canceled. That's thousands of jobs, millions of dollars, years of work. Better that than building a railroad on stolen land with blood in the foundation. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to explain to shareholders why we're starting over." Cade took a step closer, keeping his hands visible but ready. "Webb, listen to me carefully. In about 4 days, maybe 5, this whole thing is going to collapse. People are going to start asking hard questions about Vernon Hale, about his business practices, about where he got the land he's selling you. When that happens, you can be the man who blew the whistle and saved the company from catastrophic embarrassment, or you can be the man who helped cover it up. Your choice, but choose fast because the window's closing." Webb stared at him, reading Cade's face, trying to determine if this was a bluff or a promise. "Who are you?" Webb asked finally. "Just a drifter who got in Hale's way. Name's Cade Mercer, if that matters." Recognition flashed across Webb's face. "You're the one with the bounty, $5,000. $7,000 now. Price went up after I killed the first team he sent." Webb's horse shifted nervously, picking up on its rider's tension. "If Hale finds out I talked to you—" "He won't, not from me. But you need to understand what you're involved in. Hale's not just buying land. He's erasing people. Families who worked that dirt for generations. And he's using your railroad as justification, as cover for violence that has nothing to do with progress and everything to do with greed." "I didn't know," Webb said quietly. "When he first approached us, he had all the proper documentation. Titles looked legitimate. I had no reason to question. Now you do. Question it. Look closer. Talk to the families he displaced. Do the job you're supposed to be doing instead of rubber stamping whatever Hale puts in front of you." Webb sat silent for a long moment, then slowly reached into his satchel and pulled out a sheaf of papers. He handed them down to Cade. "These are the latest acquisitions," Webb said. 4 properties, total of 1,800 acres, all along the proposed corridor. Hale says the previous owners sold willingly, took fair prices, moved on to better opportunities. Cade scanned the documents. The names jumped out at him immediately. Families he recognized, people he'd seen run off their land at gunpoint. The signatures looked authentic, But Cade had seen enough forged paper to know the difference between legitimate consent and manufactured compliance. "This one," Cade said, pointing to a deed signed by a man named Thomas Garrett. "Garrett's dead. Killed in what Hale's people called an accident. Horse threw him, broke his neck. Convenient timing, 2 days after he refused to sell. And this signature? It's dated 3 days after he was buried." Webb's face went pale. That can't be right." "Check it yourself. Garrett's buried in the cemetery outside a town called Redemption. Grave marker has the date. Compare it to the deed. If what you're saying is true, it is true. And it's just one example. The others are variations on the same theme. Hale finds out the route, buys the land by any means necessary, then sells it to you at premium prices because you're on a deadline and can't afford delays. He's playing you the same way he's playing everyone else." Webb took the documents back, hands shaking slightly. "I need to verify this. Talk to my superiors. We have protocols for... Your protocols won't stop Hale from killing more people. Your protocols move at the speed of paperwork while he moves at the speed of violence. If you want to actually help, you need to act now." "And do what exactly? I'm a surveyor, not a lawman. I can file reports, raise concerns, but I can't arrest anyone or stop..." "You can stop carrying his documents," Cade interrupted. "You can stop legitimizing his theft. You can go back to your camp right now and tell your supervisors that there are serious questions about title validity, that you need to suspend all transactions with Hale pending investigation. That buys time. Time for the truth to come out, for families to find lawyers, for federal marshals to get involved. Hale will know it came from me. He'll do what? Kill a railroad surveyor in broad daylight? That brings exactly the kind of attention he's trying to avoid. Right now you're useful to him. Make yourself inconvenient instead, and he'll have to adapt. And adaptation means mistakes. Mistakes mean exposure." Webb looked down at the satchel, at the documents inside, at the choice that had somehow become a crisis in the middle of a dusty road. "I could lose my job," he said. "You could, or you could save it. Depends on how your company reacts when they realize you protected them from a fraud scandal." Webb nodded slowly, the gesture of a man accepting weight he hadn't asked for but couldn't avoid. "I'll talk to my regional director tonight. Present what you've told me, request a halt on all Hale transactions until we can verify..." "Do it in writing," Cade said. "Create a paper trail. Make it official so nobody can claim later that you didn't follow procedure. You seem to know a lot about corporate protocols for a drifter." "I pay attention. It's kept me alive." Webb gathered his reins, preparing to turn back toward the railroad camp. Then he paused, looking down at Cade with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. "What happens to you now?" Webb asked. "Hale's not going to stop hunting you just because I file a report. No, he won't. But he's about to have bigger problems than me. And when men have bigger problems, they make bigger mistakes. That's not a plan. That's hope." Cade smiled, thin and cold. "Hope's got nothing to do with it. I'm going to make sure Hale knows his scheme is falling apart. I'm going to force him to react, to scramble, to show his hand. And when he does, people will see what he really is." "By getting yourself killed?" "Maybe, but I'll make it loud enough that people pay attention." Webb shook his head. "You're insane." "Probably. Now ride before Hale sends someone to check why you're late." Webb turned his horse east and kicked it into a trot, dust rising behind him as he headed back toward the railroad camp. Cade watched him go, counting in his head. If Webb followed through, 50-50 chance, generous estimate, Hale would know within 24 hours that his railroad deal was compromised. That would trigger a response. Probably violent, definitely desperate. Good. Desperate men made mistakes. And Cade was counting on mistakes. He walked back to where the mare waited, hidden in a draw behind the rock formation. The horse lifted her head, ears forward, and Cade scratched her neck absently while his mind worked through next steps. Webb had been the first pressure point. Now Cade needed to hit the second one, the place where Hale would feel it most directly. The ranch. Not an assault. He wasn't suicidal, just pragmatic. But a message. Something that made it clear Hale's fortress wasn't as secure as he thought, that his control was slipping, that the hunter had become the hunted. Cade mounted up and turned south, back toward Hale's property. The sun was angling toward afternoon, shadows stretching long and dark across the landscape. Perfect timing for what came next. He reached the hills overlooking the ranch just as the day shift was rotating. Guards changing positions, men heading to the bunkhouse for meals, a brief window where attention was divided and routines were disrupted. Cade left the mare in the same draw as before and moved in on foot, carrying only his colt and a small canvas bag he'd prepared that morning. Inside the bag, 3 bottles of lamp oil, strips of cloth, and matches wrapped in waxed paper. Simple tools, effective when used correctly. He circled wide, approaching from the west where the ground dropped away toward a dry creek bed. The route kept him below the sight lines from the main house, and the rocks provided cover when he needed to pause and verify guard positions. The target was a storage barn at the edge of the property, away from the main structures but clearly important based on the lock on the door and the wagon tracks leading to it. Probably where Hale kept supplies, equipment, maybe weapons or ammunition. Burning it wouldn't cripple the operation, but it would send a message. Nowhere was safe, nothing was protected, and the man you're hunting is inside your defenses whenever he wants to be. Cade reached the barn without incident, picked the lock in 30 seconds. The mechanism was cheap, designed more for show than security, and slipped inside. The interior was dim, dusty, and packed with exactly what he'd expected. Crates of ammunition stacked along one wall, saddles and tack hanging from pegs, barrels of grain for the horses. And in the back corner, something unexpected. Wooden crates stamped with railroad company logos. Cade moved closer, pried one open with his knife. Inside, surveying equipment, maps, documentation. The kind of materials that would be stored somewhere secure if the transaction was legitimate, and hidden on a remote ranch if it wasn't. More evidence. More proof that Hale and the railroad were working together in ways that wouldn't survive legal scrutiny. Cade closed the crate, left it in place, and set about arranging his fire. He splashed oil on the grain barrels first. They'd burn hot and spread flames fast. Then he soaked the cloth strips, stuffed them into the bottles, and positioned them strategically around the barn's interior. The trick wasn't just starting the fire. It was starting it in a way that gave him time to escape before anyone noticed, but fast enough that by the time they responded, the damage was done. He lit the first bottle, watched the flame catch and spread, then moved quickly to the second and third positions. The fire took hold eagerly, feeding on dry wood and lamp oil, growing from small flames to serious heat in less than a minute. Cade was already moving, slipping out the door, closing it behind him to contain the fire temporarily. By the time someone spotted the smoke, he'd be gone, and by the time they organized a response, the barn would be too far gone to save. He made it 50 yards before the shouting started. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, pointing at smoke rising from the barn's roof. Someone rang a bell, harsh and insistent. More men appeared, running with buckets, organizing a water line from the nearest well. Cade kept moving, steady and controlled, resisting the urge to run. Running drew eyes. A man walking with purpose through chaos was invisible, just another body trying to help. He reached the creek bed, dropped into cover, and allowed himself a glance back. The barn was fully involved now, flames punching through the roof, heat warping the air above it. Men were throwing water on adjacent structures, trying to prevent the fire from spreading, but the barn itself was lost. Black smoke rolled skyward, visible for miles, including from the railroad camp. Webb would see that smoke, would know something had happened at Hale's ranch, would maybe start to understand that the situation was more volatile than he'd realized. Cade turned away from the spectacle and focused on extraction. He needed distance before Hale's men organized a search. The fire would occupy them for at least an hour, maybe 2. Long enough. He reached the mare without incident, mounted up, and pushed northeast, away from both the ranch and the railroad camp. The land rose into rougher terrain, hills and ravines that would hide his trail and slow any pursuit. By nightfall, he was 10 miles clear, camped in a narrow canyon with good sight lines and multiple escape routes. He didn't risk a fire. The smoke from Hale's barn was enough announcement for one day, so he ate cold jerky and thought through what came next. Webb would file his report tonight or tomorrow. That would reach Hale within a day or two through whatever back channels he had into the railroad company. The barn fire would reach him immediately, carried by the smoke and the panic. 2 hits in one day. 2 messages that his control was breaking, that his plans were compromised, that the man he was hunting him back. Hale would respond. Had to respond. His whole strategy depended on projecting strength, maintaining the illusion that he was untouchable. Cade had just shattered that illusion publicly. The response would be violent, overwhelming, and probably stupid. Cade was counting on stupid. He slept in shifts, waking every 2 hours to check the perimeter, listening for hoofbeats or voices that would signal pursuit. But the night stayed quiet except for coyotes arguing in the distance and wind moving through the canyon like whispered warnings. Morning came gray and cold, clouds building in the west with the promise of rain that probably wouldn't materialize. Cade chewed more jerky, gave the mare the last of the water from a small seep he'd found, and climbed to high ground to survey the landscape. No dust plumes, no search parties visible. Either Hale was being patient, unlikely, or he was organizing something bigger than a standard manhunt. By mid-morning, Cade had his answer. Riders appeared from the south, moving in formation. Not the scattered pursuit of desperate men hoping for bounty money. This was organized, military and precision. 12 men, maybe 15, working in coordinated groups to sweep the terrain. Professionals. The kind Cutler had hired in Crucible, or others like them. Hale had escalated. Cade watched them work, reading their tactics, identifying their leader, a man who rode slightly ahead, directing the sweep with hand signals. They were good. Experienced. The kind of men who'd hunted other men before and knew how to do it efficiently. But they were also following predictable patterns, searching in expanding circles from Hale's ranch, assuming their target had fled and would be found through persistence and superior numbers. They were wrong on both counts. Cade wasn't fleeing, and numbers didn't matter if you could turn them against themselves. He spent the rest of the day ghosting ahead of the search parties, staying just out of sight, leaving occasional false trails that would waste their time and effort. A boot print in soft ground leading the wrong direction. A torn piece of cloth caught on mesquite. A cold campsite arranged to look like someone had left in a hurry. Breadcrumbs leading nowhere. By evening, the searchers were scattered, frustrated, following trails that contradicted each other. Cade heard them arguing at one point, voices carrying across the empty land, debating which direction to commit to. Division. Uncertainty. The first cracks in their coordination. As darkness fell, Cade doubled back, circling wide to approach their camp from the north. They'd made the classic mistake of assuming safety in numbers, building a fire big enough to see from miles away, posting guards who were more focused on staying warm than watching the darkness. Cade moved to within 100 yards of the camp and settled in to listen. The conversation was instructive. The leader, a man called Vane, professional gun with a reputation Cade vaguely recognized, was laying out tomorrow's strategy. More systematic search, tighter grid pattern, pressure from multiple directions to force the target into a kill box. Smart tactics, if the target was running. Vane continued, Hale wants this finished. He's paying double if we bring Mercer in by week's end, triple if it's alive. One of the other men laughed, harsh and bitter. Alive. Right. Because that worked so well at Lost Crossing. Lost Crossing was amateurs, Vane said. We're not. Doesn't matter how professional we are if we can't find him. Man's like smoke. Soon as you think you got him pinned, he's somewhere else. Then we stop trying to pin him. We force him to come to us. How? Vane paused, and Cade could imagine him smiling in the firelight. Hale's got leverage, the families Mercer tried to protect. We put pressure there. Word gets to Mercer, he comes running to play hero again. Then we take him. Silence from the other men, the kind that said they understood the implications and weren't entirely comfortable with them. Finally, someone said, You talking about using civilians as bait? I'm talking about doing whatever it takes to finish the job. Hale's paying for results, not methods. You got a problem with that, there's the door. Well, the desert, same thing. No one argued. Mercenaries rarely did when the money was good and the orders were clear. Cade had heard enough. He withdrew as silently as he'd arrived, mind already working through the new information. Vane was smart, ruthless, and willing to target innocents to achieve his objective. That made him dangerous, but also predictable. Men who relied on brutality tended to overlook subtle approaches. And Cade specialized in subtle. He spent that night moving fast, putting miles between himself and the search parties. By dawn, he was back near the border, approaching the town where the families Hale had displaced were now trying to rebuild their lives. Redemption. Ironic name for a place where people came after losing everything. Cade rode in at midday, dust-covered and exhausted, leading a horse that was one day away from lame. He found the church. Every town had one, whether the building was official or just a tent with a cross, and asked for Thomas Garrett's widow. The woman who answered the description was in her 40s, weathered by sun and hardship, eyes that had seen too much loss. She was hanging laundry behind a small house that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. "Mrs. Garrett?" Cade said, removing his hat. She turned, cautious but not afraid. "Who's asking?" "Name's Cade Mercer. I knew your husband briefly. I'm sorry for your loss." Her face hardened. "You're the one Hale's hunting, the one with the bounty." "Yes, ma'am." "Then you should leave. Bringing trouble here is the last thing these people need." "I understand, but I need to warn you. Hale's men are planning to use you and the other families as leverage against me. They think I'll come running to protect you, and they'll be waiting with guns." Mrs. Garrett's hands stilled on the laundry. "When?" "Soon. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but it's coming. And you're telling us this because you deserve to know, and because I need you to not be here when they arrive." She studied him for a long moment. "Where are we supposed to go? We got nothing. No money, no property. Nowhere that'll take in a dozen families running from Vernon Hale. There's a railroad camp 15 miles east. Surveyor named Marcus Webb. Tell him I sent you. Tell him you're the families Hale displaced, and you need temporary shelter while the land titles get sorted out. He'll help." "Why would he do that?" "Because I gave him information that's about to destroy Hale's railroad deal. Because he's complicit in what happened to you whether he knew it or not, and he's looking for ways to make it right. And because if he doesn't help, I'll make sure his company knows he turned away witnesses to fraud." Mrs. Garrett almost smiled. "You blackmailing a railroad surveyor on our behalf?" Strongly encouraging, there's a difference. This time she did smile, small and sad. "Thomas would have liked you. He always said the world needed more people willing to stand up when standing up cost something. Your husband was a good man. What Hale did to him was murder, no matter what the paperwork says. I know, but knowing doesn't bring him back." "No, but it might bring Hale down, if we do this right." Mrs. Garrett looked at the laundry, at the house that wasn't hers, at the life that had been stolen and replaced with this pale imitation. "I'll talk to the others," she said finally. "Get them moving. How much time do we have?" "Not much. Pack light, move fast, and don't tell anyone where you're going except the people who need to know." She nodded, already turning toward the house, calling names, organizing the evacuation with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to survive by adapting quickly. Cade watched her work for a moment, then mounted up and rode out of town the same way he'd arrived. He'd done what he could. The rest was up to the families and whatever grace or luck governed the lives of people caught between powerful men with competing interests. He headed south again, back toward Hale's ranch, but this time with different intentions. It was time to stop dancing around the edges. Time to face Vernon Hale directly and end this before more people died. The mayor carried him through afternoon heat toward a confrontation that would either finish the war or finish him. Cade didn't particularly care which. He just wanted it done. The ride back toward Hale's territory felt different this time. Not because the landscape had changed, the same rocks, the same dead earth, the same heat pressing down like a physical weight. Different because Cade was done being reactive, done waiting for the next attack, the next ambush, the next team of hired guns trying to collect bounty money. He'd spent his entire adult life reading situations, calculating odds, choosing when to fight, and when to disappear. It was how you survived in country, where the wrong choice meant a shallow grave and nobody asking questions. But survival wasn't the same as living, and Cade was tired of the mathematics that kept him breathing but never let him rest. The mayor sensed his mood, ears swiveling nervously, picking up tension in his posture. He touched her neck, gentle reassurance, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "Easy, girl, just a bit more." The sun was dropping toward the western horizon when Cade spotted the dust. Not from Hale's ranch, too far east for that. This was coming from the direction of Crucible, multiple riders moving with purpose. He found cover in a dry wash and watched them pass. 6 men, heavily armed, led by someone Cade recognized even at distance. Silas Vane. So Vane had pulled his search teams back, regrouped, and was now heading somewhere specific. Probably toward redemption, expecting to find the families Hale wanted to use as leverage. Except the families weren't there anymore. Cade smiled grimly. Vane was riding into an empty trap, which would accomplish 2 things: waste his time and make him angry. Angry men made mistakes, and Vane struck Cade as the type whose professionalism evaporated when his plans fell apart. Useful information. Cade waited until the riders disappeared east, then continued south. The direct approach would get him killed. Hale's ranch was still fortified, still crawling with guards who'd been put on high alert after the barn fire. But Cade wasn't planning a frontal assault, he was planning something smarter. The town of Crucible sat quiet in the evening light when Cade rode in 2 hours later. Same collection of buildings that looked temporary even though they'd been standing for years. Same tired horses tied outside the saloon. Same sense that this was a place people passed through on their way to somewhere worse. Cade tied his mare near the livery, not too close, in case he needed to leave fast, and walked toward the saloon's back entrance. The place was half full, men drinking away wages they'd earned doing jobs they wouldn't discuss. The bartender was a different face than last time, but the suspicious look was identical. Cade ordered whiskey he didn't plan to drink and found a corner table where he could watch the room. He wasn't here for information this time. He was here to be seen. It took 20 minutes. A man Cade didn't recognize approached the table, moving carefully, hands visible. Young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that hadn't decided yet if it was going to settle into hardness or maintain some scrap of softness. "You're Mercer," the man said. Not a question. "That a problem?" "Depends. You looking for trouble or trying to avoid it?" "Neither. I'm looking for someone who can carry a message." The young man's eyes narrowed. "Message to who?" "Vernon Hale." A ripple went through the nearby tables. Men who'd been pretending not to listen suddenly found their drinks very interesting. The young man's hand drifted toward his belt, then stopped when he saw Cade's complete lack of reaction. "You got a death wish?" the young man asked. "Maybe. But right now I've got words Hale needs to hear, and I need someone to deliver them who won't get shot on sight. You work for him?" "I work for whoever's paying. Right now that's nobody." "Then you're perfect. $5 to ride to Hale's ranch and deliver a verbal message. Yes or no?" The young man considered, weighing risk against reward. $5 was good money for a couple hours' work, but walking into Hale's ranch carrying words from the man Hale was hunting was the kind of job that could end badly. "What's the message?" he asked finally. "Tell Hale I'm done running, tell him I'm in Crucible waiting at the saloon, and if he wants to finish this, he can ride in himself instead of sending men to die in his place. Tell him I know about the railroad deal, about the forged deeds, about all of it. And tell him that by tomorrow morning, every federal marshal within 100 miles will know it too, unless he comes here and talks to me face to face." The young man's eyebrows climbed. You're asking him to ride into a trap. I'm asking him to have a conversation. What happens after depends on whether he's smart enough to realize his options are shrinking. He'll bring men, a lot of them. I expect he will. That's his choice. My offer stands either way. The young man shook his head slowly. "You're insane. You're the third person to tell me that this week. Doesn't make it less true. You want the $5 or not?" Money appeared on this table. The young man looked at it, looked at Cade, then took the coins and stood. "If Hale kills me for bringing this message, I'm haunting you," he said. "Fair enough." The young man left and Cade settled in to wait. The whiskey sat untouched in front of him, amber liquid catching lamplight. Around him, the saloon's population slowly thinned as word spread that Cade Mercer was sitting in the corner issuing challenges to Vernon Hale. People who'd been drinking found sudden reasons to be elsewhere. The bartender approached, nervous energy rolling off him like steam. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "This place can't handle whatever's about to happen. Then close early, send everyone home, because I'm not moving. Hale will burn this building down with you in it." "Maybe, but probably not. Fire's too obvious, too public. He's trying to maintain the image of a legitimate businessman. Can't do that if he's torching saloons in front of witnesses." The bartender looked like he wanted to argue, then just walked away muttering about insurance and repairs. Within 15 minutes, the saloon was empty except for Cade and one old man too drunk to understand he should be scared. Cade sat in the silence, listening to his own breathing, feeling the weight of the Colt at his hip. This was the opposite of every tactical decision he'd made for years. Instead of staying mobile, he'd planted himself in a fixed position. Instead of maintaining the advantage of surprise, he'd announced his location. Instead of controlling the engagement, he'd handed that control to his enemy. It violated every survival instinct he'd cultivated. But survival instinct was what kept men running forever, always reactive, always one step ahead of the next threat. And Cade was done running. 2 hours passed. The drunk finally stumbled out into the night, leaving Cade completely alone. The bartender had locked the front door and disappeared through the back, probably to whatever hole he crawled into when trouble came calling. Lamplight flickered, shadows dancing on walls that had absorbed decades of violence and desperation. Cade's hand stayed relaxed on the table, but his mind was mapping the room, counting angles, identifying cover positions, calculating how many men he could drop before they overwhelmed him. The answer was not enough, not if Hale came with his full force. But that wasn't the point. The point was to force Hale out from behind his walls, to make him vulnerable, to create a situation where all the money and hired guns couldn't protect him from scrutiny. Hoofbeats outside, multiple horses, moving slow and cautious. Cade didn't move, didn't reach for his gun, just waited. The front door rattled, locked, then heavy footsteps around the side toward the back entrance. Voices conferring, making decisions. The back door opened. Vernon Hale walked in, flanked by 4 men with rifles. Hale himself was unarmed, at least visibly, dressed like he was attending a business meeting instead of confronting the man who'd been dismantling his empire piece by piece. Expensive suit, polished boots, silver hair swept back from a face that looked more like a banker than a land thief. He was shorter than Cade expected. Maybe 5'8", compact build, the kind of man who'd learned early that physical presence mattered less than the ability to make other men do violence on your behalf. "Mercer," Hale said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone used to being the most powerful person in any room. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which." "Could be both," Cade said. "Sit down. Send your men outside. This conversation doesn't need an audience." Hale's smile was thin and cold. "You don't give me orders." "I'm not ordering. I'm suggesting. You came here because you're worried, because things are falling apart faster than you can control them, and because somewhere in that calculating mind of yours, you know that killing me solves nothing and possibly makes everything worse." One of Hale's men moved forward, rifle rising, but Hale held up a hand and the man stopped. "Let's say you're right," Hale said. "Let's say I'm concerned about certain complications. What makes you think I won't just have my men shoot you and be done with it? Because we're sitting in the middle of Crucible with witnesses all around. Because shooting me creates a murder investigation you don't want. Because I've already sent documentation of your land fraud to 3 different federal marshals, with instructions to investigate if anything happens to me. And because you're curious about what I'm offering." Hale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, reassessment, the mental gymnastics of a man trying to stay ahead of a situation that was rapidly escaping his control. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from Cade, gestured to his men, who reluctantly filed back outside. Not far. Cade could hear them positioning themselves near the windows and doors, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. "You're bluffing about the marshals," Hale said. "Am I? If you'd actually sent evidence, they'd already be crawling over my property. You're using the threat to buy time." "Maybe. Or maybe they're waiting to see if I turn up dead, which would prove conspiracy and turn a fraud case into a murder investigation. Federal marshals move slow, but they move certain. And once they start, they don't stop until someone's in prison or a grave." Hale leaned back, studying Cade with the intensity of a man trying to find the weakness in a business rival's proposal. "What do you want?" "I want you to stop. Cease all land acquisitions. Return the properties you stole to the families you displaced. Provide fair compensation for the ones who've already moved on. And walk away from the railroad deal before it destroys what's left of your reputation." Hale laughed, short and sharp. "That's what you want? For me to just give up everything I've built? I want you to stop building on corpses and stolen land. There's a difference. You're a fool. This is business. People get displaced during progress. It's unfortunate, but it's necessary." Thomas Garrett wasn't displaced. He was murdered. His deed was forged 3 days after he was buried. That's not business, Hale. That's crime. For the first time, real anger crossed Hale's face. "You don't know anything about the necessities of building something larger than yourself. That railroad will bring jobs, commerce, civilization to a territory that desperately needs it. A few individuals suffering minor inconvenience is acceptable cost. Minor inconvenience, Cade repeated flatly. You killed a man and stole his land, and you call it minor inconvenience. Garrett's death was an accident. Regrettable, but it was murder. You had Cutler or one of your other dogs do it, made it look like he fell off a horse, then forged his signature on documents that made you rich. And you're telling yourself it was necessary because you can't face what you actually are. Hale's hands clenched on the table. Careful, Mercer. You're in no position to judge me. I'm in exactly the position to judge you. I'm the one you sent 6 men to kill, the one you put a $7,000 bounty on, the one who's been dismantling your operation while you've been hiding behind walls and hired guns. So yeah, I'm judging you, and the verdict isn't good. Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Outside, one of Hale's men coughed. A horse stamped nervously. What happens if I refuse? Hale asked finally. If I just have my men shoot you right now and deal with whatever consequences come, then you prove you're exactly what I've been saying you are. And every railroad executive, every federal marshal, every newspaper from here to the territorial capital will know it. Your partner Webb is already filing reports that question the land titles. The families you displaced are giving statements. The evidence is piling up, Hale. Killing me just adds murder to the charges. Webb is a minor functionary. His reports mean nothing. They mean enough that your deal's on hold pending investigation. I made sure of that. Hale's face went pale. You're lying. Am I? When's the last time you talked to your railroad contacts? When's the last time they confirmed the timeline for finalizing the purchases? Hale's jaw worked, grinding through the implications. He pulled a pocket watch from his vest, checked the time like it mattered, then put it away with hands that weren't quite steady. Even if what you're saying is true, he said quietly, even if Webb filed his concerns and the company's investigating, that doesn't end my operation. It delays it. And delays can be managed with the right incentives, the right pressure applied to the right people. You mean bribes, threats, the same tools you've been using all along. I mean leverage. Business runs on leverage, Mercer. You understand that, even if you pretend not to. Everyone has a price or a weakness. Find it, exploit it, achieve your objective. And what's your price, Hale? What would it take for you to walk away clean? Hale smiled, and for the first time it looked genuine. Not friendly. Nothing about Vernon Hale would ever be friendly, but real. There's no walking away. Not from something this big. The railroad's coming whether you like it or not. The route's been decided, the investment's made, the future written. I'm either part of that future or I'm crushed by it. Those are the only options. Then you're already crushed. You just don't know it yet. Big words from a man sitting across from me with 4 rifles pointed at his back. Those rifles don't change reality. They just delay it. And reality's coming for you fast, Hale. The family's talking, Webb investigating, federal marshals asking questions. How long before someone finds Garrett's real death certificate and compares it to the deed signature? How long before a territorial judge starts looking at your land acquisitions and sees the pattern? You built this empire on secrets and violence, but secrets don't keep and violence leaves bodies, and bodies tell stories. Hale stood abruptly, chair scraping loud in the quiet room. This conversation is over. Is it? Because you rode all the way here to have it. That suggests you're more worried than you're admitting. I came here to see if you were worth the bounty. You're not. You're just another idealist who thinks the world runs on fairness instead of power. It doesn't. It never has. And killing you will be easier than listening to more of your self-righteous speeches. Hale turned toward the door, and Cade spoke quietly to his back. I'm not trying to be righteous. I'm trying to give you a chance to end this before it ends you. Walk away, Hale. Disappear. Take whatever money you've got hidden and go somewhere the law won't follow. Because if you stay, if you keep fighting, you'll lose. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually. And when you lose, you'll lose everything. Hale paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from outside. You really believe that? I know it. I've watched powerful men fall before. They always think they're too smart, too connected, too essential, right up until the moment they're not. And you think you're the one who'll bring me down? No. I think you'll bring yourself down. I'm just making sure there's someone paying attention when you do. Hale walked out without another word. His men followed, rifles still ready, eyes locked on Cade like he might suddenly become dangerous now that their boss was leaving. Cade stayed seated, hands flat on the table, watching through the window as Hale and his men mounted up. They didn't ride toward the ranch, though. They headed east toward Redemption, toward where Hale thought the families were waiting. Cade stood, stretched muscles that had been tense too long, and walked to the back door. The night was cool, stars bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled its loneliness to the empty desert. The mare nickered when he approached, glad to see him alive. He untied her, swung into the saddle, and turned east as well, because Vane and his men were also heading to Redemption. And when Vane discovered the families had fled, when Hale arrived expecting to find leverage and found nothing, there would be a moment, brief, volatile, where both men would be off balance, angry, and looking for someone to blame. And Cade planned to be there to make sure they blamed each other. The ride to Redemption took 3 hours through darkness that felt thicker than usual, pregnant with the promise of violence. Cade pushed the mare harder than he liked, but timing mattered more than caution now. He approached the town from the north, circling wide to get a sense of who'd arrived first. Vane's horses were tied outside the church, 6 of them, tired and ill-tempered. No sign of Hale's group yet, which meant Cade had maybe 30 minutes before both parties converged on an empty town. He tied the mare in a stand of cottonwoods near the dried creek bed and moved in on foot. The church was dark, except for a single lantern burning inside, throwing shadows against the windows. Voices filtered out, Vane's among them, sharp with frustration. "Told you they'd be here. Hale's intelligence said—" Hale's intelligence was wrong. A different voice, older, less patient. "Place is empty. They cleared out." "Then where'd they go?" "How should I know? Could be anywhere. Mexico, California. Could have just scattered into the desert to die. Point is, they're not here, and we wasted a day chasing ghosts." Hale's not going to accept that. He needs those families. Without them, he's got no leverage on Mercer. Then Hale's got a problem. Because unless you got a crystal ball telling you where they went, we're done here. Cade heard chairs scraping, boots on floorboards. The men were preparing to leave, probably to report back to Hale that the plan had failed, which was when hoofbeats approached from the south. Hale, arriving right on schedule. Cade positioned himself in the shadows between 2 buildings, 30 yards from the church, with clear sight lines to both entrances. This was going to get interesting. Hale dismounted along with his 4 men, striding toward the church with the confidence of someone expecting good news. He pushed through the door, and Cade could hear the exact moment he realized something was wrong. "Where are they?" Hale's voice sharp and demanding. "Gone." Vane, flat and unapologetic. "Town's empty. Been empty for at least a day, maybe more." "That's impossible. My sources confirmed they were here." "Your sources were wrong, or the information's old. Either way, we got nothing." A pause, heavy with the weight of men recalculating their positions. Then Hale again, colder now. "You were supposed to secure them. That was your job." "My job was to find Mercer. You said the families were stationary, that they'd be easy to collect. You didn't say anything about them evacuating. Because they shouldn't have evacuated. They have nowhere to go, no resources, no—" Hale stopped abruptly. "Mercer. He warned them. He must have. If he warned them, he knew we were coming, which means someone told him the plan." "Are you suggesting I have a leak in my organization?" Vane's laugh was harsh. "I'm suggesting your organization isn't as tight as you think it is. Mercer's been 2 steps ahead this whole time. Burned your barn, compromised your railroad deal, and now he's moved the one piece of leverage you had. Face it, Hale. You're losing." The sound of a blow, flesh on flesh, someone stumbling. Then Vane's voice, low and dangerous. "Touch me again, and your men won't save you." "You work for me," Hale snarled. "You take my money, you follow my orders, and you don't talk to me like I work for whoever's paying. Right now, that's you. But the job was to bring in Mercer, not chase phantoms across the territory because your intelligence is bad. You want me to keep working? You pay for results I can actually deliver. You want to throw punches because you're frustrated? You can find another contractor." Silence. Cade could imagine the standoff, Hale and Vane locked in a battle of wills. Both men too proud to back down, but smart enough to recognize the cost of escalation. Finally, Hale spoke, quieter, but no less angry. "What do you suggest?" "We go back to basics. Forget the families. Forget the clever traps. Mercer wants a straight fight. We give him one. Put enough men on him that he can't slip away. Overwhelm him with force. Finish this. I've already tried that. Lost Crossing was supposed to be overwhelming force." "Lost Crossing was amateurs. I'm talking about professionals. Double the team, triple the bounty, make it worth enough that every gun in the territory comes running. Mercer's good, but he's not immortal. Enough pressure, he breaks. They all do. Hale considered this, and Cade could hear the wheels turning even from outside. More men meant more money, more risk, more exposure. But it also meant ending the situation before it spiraled further out of control. How much? Hale asked. 50,000. Total pool. Split between whoever brings him in. That'll pull in the best contractors from 3 territories over. That's insane. That's what it costs to guarantee results. You want this done or not? More silence. Then, reluctantly, fine. 50,000. But I want him within a week. Alive if possible, dead if necessary. But I want proof, and I want it soon. You'll have it. Footsteps toward the door, conversation over. Cade melted deeper into shadows as both groups emerged. Vane's men first, moving to their horses, then Hale and his guards. They mounted up separately, heading in different directions. Vane's group west toward Crucible to start spreading word about the increased bounty. Hale's group south toward his ranch, probably to count money and curse the drifter who'd turned his organized business into chaos. Cade waited until both groups were clear, then returned to his mare. The conversation had given him exactly what he needed. Confirmation that Hale was desperate, that Vane was mercenary enough to work for anyone, and that the bounty had just jumped to a level that would attract every dangerous man within 100 miles. $50,000. That changed everything. That turned this from a personal vendetta into a territorial manhunt. Every gun hand, every tracker, every professional killer would be converging on this area looking for one man, looking for Cade Mercer. Most people would run at that point, disappear into Mexico or California, change names, start over somewhere the bounty couldn't reach. But Cade had spent too much time running, and running only delayed the inevitable. Eventually someone would recognize him, word would spread, and it would start all over again. Better to end it here, now, on his terms. He mounted the mare and turned south, following Hale at a distance. Not to attack, not yet, just to keep pressure, to maintain the presence, to remind Hale that walls and guards and money couldn't protect him from a man who'd already decided the cost of stopping didn't matter anymore. The night swallowed him, and somewhere ahead, Vernon Hale rode toward a ranch that felt less like a fortress and more like a prison with every mile. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt like the desert itself was holding its breath. Cade watched Hale's ranch from his position in the hills, the same spot he'd used for days now, worn into the dirt like a grave he was digging 1 hour at a time. The $50,000 bounty would be spreading by now. Vane's men riding to every town, every camp, every hole where desperate men gathered to trade stories and ammunition. By noon, maybe sooner, the professionals would start arriving. The kind who didn't ask questions, didn't care about right or wrong, just wanted the number in their pockets and the reputation that came with bringing down a man worth that kind of money. Cade had maybe 12 hours before the territory became a hunting ground he couldn't navigate, which meant if he was going to act, it needed to be now. He'd spent the night thinking through angles, discarding plans that relied on luck or perfect timing. What remained was simple, brutal, and had maybe a 30% chance of working. But 30% was better than 0, and 0 was what he'd have by tomorrow. The mare stood nearby, head low, exhausted from days of hard riding and short rations. Cade walked over, ran his hand along her neck, feeling the tremble of tired muscle under dusty coat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This wasn't fair to you." The horse didn't answer, just pressed her nose against his chest in the way animals do when they're too worn down to complain. Cade pulled the saddle off, checked her legs for injury, gave her what was left of the water. She'd earned better than being ridden to death in someone else's war. If this went wrong, when it went wrong, he corrected himself, at least she'd have a chance to wander down to the river, find grass, maybe get picked up by someone who'd treat her decent. He kept his gun, his knife, and 3 things from his saddlebag. The wanted poster with his face on it, a pencil stub he'd been carrying for months, and a single match wrapped in wax paper. Then he started walking toward Hale's ranch on foot. The sun climbed as he moved, heat building despite the early hour. By the time he reached the outer fence line, sweat was cutting tracks through the dust on his face, and his shirt was stuck to his back. He didn't bother with stealth this time, just walked straight up the main road toward the ranch house like he'd been invited. The guards spotted him at 100 yards. Shouting erupted, men scrambling for rifles, someone running toward the house to raise the alarm. Within 2 minutes, a dozen guns were pointed at Cade from various positions around the property. He kept walking, hands visible at his sides, the wanted poster held up in his left hand. "I'm here to see Hale," he called out. "Tell him Cade Mercer's at his front door, unarmed, ready to talk terms." "You're not unarmed," one of the guards yelled back. "I can see the gun." Cade stopped, unbuckled his gun belt slowly, and dropped it in the dirt. The Colt lay there, metal gleaming in the morning light, and Cade felt the absence of it like a missing limb. "Now I'm unarmed," he said. "Get Hale." The guards looked at each other, uncertain. This wasn't in their training. Targets weren't supposed to walk up and surrender. Finally, one of them disappeared into the house while the others kept their rifles trained on Cade, fingers on triggers, waiting for the excuse. 5 minutes passed. Then Vernon Hale emerged onto the porch, dressed like he was ready for a morning meeting instead of a confrontation. Behind him, more guards positioned themselves, creating a wall of armed men between Hale and the stranger who'd torched his barn and dismantled his empire piece by piece. "Mercer," Hale said, his voice carrying across the distance. "This is unexpected." "I imagine so. Can we talk?" "We talked last night. You made your position clear. That was before the bounty hit 50,000. That changes the situation." Hale's expression flickered. Surprise, calculation, suspicion, all fighting for dominance. "How did you know about that?" "Vane only finalized the number last night." "I was there. Outside the church in Redemption. Heard the whole conversation. More surprised that this time mixed with something that might have been respect. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Walking into my ranch after eavesdropping on a private discussion about how much your head is worth. Nerve or stupidity hasn't been decided yet." Cade took a few steps closer, stopping when rifles tracked his movement. "Here's what I'm offering. You and me, alone, inside your house. No guards, no weapons, no witnesses. 30 minutes to work out a deal that gets us both out of this alive." "Why would I agree to that? I can have my men shoot you right now and save $50,000. "Because shooting me solves nothing. The federal marshals already have my statements. Webb's already filed his reports. The families are already talking. Killing me just proves everything I've said about you is true and makes you the primary suspect in a murder investigation. But if I disappear voluntarily, if I agree to leave the territory and never come back, your problems go away. The bounty gets canceled, the questions fade, and you can salvage what's left of your railroad deal without me standing in the way." Hale descended the porch steps, moving closer, studying Cade like a specimen under glass. "You'd really do that? Just leave? After everything you've said about justice and standing up for those families?" "I'd do that to stay alive. Turns out, I'm not as righteous as I thought. Turns out, when $50,000 in bounty money is about to bring every killer in 3 territories down on my head, righteousness feels a lot like suicide. It was a good lie. Built on truth, the bounty was real, the threat was real, and seasoned with the kind of self-preservation that men like Hale understood instinctively. Everyone had a breaking point. Everyone could be bought or scared into compliance. Hale wanted to believe it because believing it meant winning. "What guarantees do I have that you'll keep your word?" Hale asked. "Same guarantees I have that you won't just shoot me the moment we're alone." "None. This is a trust transaction, Hale. We both take the risk or we both keep fighting until one of us is dead." Hale considered this, weighing odds, calculating benefits. Finally, he nodded. 30 minutes. No weapons, no guards. But if this is a trick, then your men will hear the gunshot and find my body. I understand the terms. Hale gestured toward the house. "After you." Cade walked past the guards, their rifles following his movement, fingers tight on triggers. He climbed the porch steps, crossed the threshold into Vernon Hale's ranch house, and entered a world that smelled like leather and expensive tobacco. The interior was exactly what Cade expected. Too much furniture, too much decoration, the kind of place designed to impress visitors and remind them who had money and who didn't. Hale led him to a study lined with books that probably had never been read and closed the door behind them. They stood facing each other across a desk that could have doubled as a dining table. "Talk," Hale said. Cade pulled out the wanted poster, smoothed it on the desk. Then he took the pencil stub and wrote across the bottom. "Deal reached. Bounty canceled. Mercer leaves territory immediately. Signed witnesses required." He slid it across to Hale. "You sign this, I sign it, we both walk away." You tell Vane and your other contractors that the situation's resolved, that I've agreed to disappear, and that anyone who touches me after this signed agreement voids the bounty and answers to you personally. That gives me safe passage out of the territory, gives you the resolution you need." Hale picked up the poster, read Cade's handwriting, then looked up with something like amusement. "This is your plan? A note scribbled on a wanted poster?" "It's a contract, informal, but binding enough if we both honor it." "And if I don't honor it? If I sign this, let you walk out, then tell my men to shoot you the moment you're off my property? Then you prove you're exactly what I've been saying, a man whose word means nothing. And when word spreads that Vernon Hale can't be trusted to honor his agreements, your business relationships start to crumble. Nobody deals with a man who breaks contracts. That's assuming anyone finds out. They will. I've got letters written, statements prepared, people waiting to hear from me. If I don't check in by tomorrow, everything goes public. Every newspaper, every federal office, every judge and marshal gets copies. Your reputation won't survive it." Another lie, but constructed on the framework of possibility. Hale didn't know what preparations Cade had or hadn't made. The uncertainty was its own leverage. Hale set the poster down, walked to a cabinet, and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered one to Cade. "To resolution," Hale said. Cade didn't take the glass. "I'm not here to drink with you. I'm here to end this. Suspicious, smart, but suspicious." Hale drank from one glass, then the other, proving neither was poisoned. Then he set them both down and returned to the desk. "Let me tell you what I think is really happening here. I think you're out of options. I think the bounty scared you more than you're admitting, and I think you walked in here hoping to negotiate your way out because fighting your way out stopped being possible." "Maybe. But I also think you've got one more trick planned. Something you're not telling me. Because men like you don't just surrender. You're too stubborn, too convinced you're on the right side, so what is it? What's the real play here?" Cade met Hale's eyes, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Two men who'd built their lives on reading situations and staying one step ahead. "The real play," Cade said slowly, "is that I need you to believe I'm scared enough to run. Because if you believe that, you'll sign this paper, call off your dogs, and think you've won. And while you're celebrating your victory, while you're telling your railroad friends that the Mercer problem is solved, the truth starts coming out. Webb's investigation finds the forged deeds. The families testify about the violence. Federal marshals connect Garrett's death to your operation. And by the time you realize this paper wasn't about me leaving, it was about creating a document with your signature on it, admitting you had a deal with the man who exposed your fraud. It's too late." Hale's face went carefully blank. "That's elaborate. That's insurance. You kill me. You're a murderer. You let me leave. You're complicit in everything I've accused you of. Either way, you lose. The only question is how badly. Unless I just shoot you right now and burn this paper. Then your guards heard us talking, heard you agree to let me leave. When I turn up dead, they start wondering what really happened in this room. And wondering leads to talking. Talking leads to investigations. Investigations lead to truth. You've built your whole empire on controlling information, Hale. But information wants to be free. It leaks. It spreads. It finds daylight." Hale walked to the window, looking out over his property, the land he'd acquired through blood and fraud, the fortress that was starting to feel more like a trap. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost thoughtful. "You know what the worst part is? You're probably right. Not about the moral dimensions. I still think you're a self-righteous fool who doesn't understand how the world actually works. But about the practical reality. I'm running out of moves. The railroad deal is compromised. The families are talking. Webb's investigating. And now there's a $50,000 bounty that's going to attract so much attention that even if someone kills you, the questions won't stop. So call it off," Cade said. "Cancel the bounty, return the land, compensate the families. You're rich enough to absorb the loss. Take what you can salvage and walk away while you still have a reputation to protect." Hale turned from the window and his smile was bitter. "You really don't understand, do you? It's not about the money. It never was. It's about building something larger than myself. About leaving a mark on this territory that says Vernon Hale was here and mattered. The railroad was supposed to be my legacy. Towns growing up along the route, commerce flowing, my name on plaques and dedications. That's what I wanted. That's what you're taking from me. I'm not taking anything. I'm just refusing to let you build it on graves." "Same thing. from where I'm standing." They stood in silence, the weight of irreconcilable positions settling between them. Outside, guards moved through their routines, unaware that everything they'd been working toward was crumbling inside a study where two men couldn't find common ground. Finally, Hale picked up the wanted poster, pulled a pen from his desk, and signed his name across the bottom. His handwriting was precise, controlled, the signature of a man who'd signed thousands of documents and knew the weight each carried. "There," he said, sliding it toward Cade. "Your insurance policy. My admission of whatever you think it proves. Now get out. Take your moral victory and leave before I change my mind." Cade didn't touch the paper. "I need you to actually cancel the bounty. Tell Vane, tell your men, send word to every town and camp. Make it official." "Why? You've got what you wanted." "Because until that bounty's canceled, I'm still a target, and targets don't make it very far before someone collects." Hale stared at him, working through the logic, recognizing the trap within the trap. If he canceled the bounty, he admitted the deal was real. If he didn't, Cade would never leave and the situation would continue escalating. "Fine," Hale said finally. He walked to the door, opened it, called for one of his guards. "Get Vane. Tell him the Mercer bounty is canceled immediately. Anyone who touches Mercer after this moment answers to me personally. Spread the word to every contractor, every town, everywhere the notice was posted." The guard looked confused, but nodded and left. Hale closed the door again. "Satisfied?" he asked. "Getting there." Cade finally picked up the signed poster, folded it carefully, and tucked it inside his shirt. "One more thing. The family's Hale displaced. They get their land back, or they get fair compensation. Real compensation, not the pittance you offered before." "Absolutely not. That's too far." "That's the price of me actually leaving. You want me gone, you make things right with the people you wronged. Otherwise I stay, and we both see how this plays out." Hale's jaw clenched. "You're pushing your luck. I'm negotiating. You understand negotiation." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Hale nodded, sharp and angry. "Fine. The families get their land back or fair market value, but then you're gone. Permanently. I hear you're even thinking about coming back to this territory. I'll put 100,000 on your head and hire every gun from here to Texas." "Deal." Cade extended his hand. Hale looked at it like it was poisonous, then shook it quickly, gripped too tight, trying to salvage some dominance from a situation where he'd been outmaneuvered at every turn. "Get out of my house," Hale said. Cade walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it's worth, Hale, you could have been something better. You had money, connections, influence, could have built that legacy you wanted without hurting people. Could have been remembered as the man who brought progress instead of the man who brought pain. That was your choice. You made the wrong one. Save your judgment for someone who cares. You're a drifter with a gun and delusions of righteousness. I'm a builder. History will remember me. You'll just disappear." "Maybe. But I'll sleep better." Cade walked out, through the guards who watched him with confused hostility, down the steps, across the dirt to where his gun belt still lay. He picked it up, buckled it on, felt the familiar weight settle against his hip. Nobody shot him. Nobody moved to stop him. He walked north, away from the ranch, toward the hills where the mare waited. Every step felt like tempting fate, like the bullet would come any second. But it didn't. Hale had given the order, and for now at least, his word held weight. Cade found the mare grazing on tough grass near the dried creek bed. She lifted her head, ears forward, and he could swear she looked relieved to see him. "We're leaving," he told her. "For real this time. No more fighting, no more running, just distance." He saddled her slowly, checking the cinch twice, making sure everything was secure. Then he mounted and turned east, toward the railroad camp where Webb and the families were negotiating futures that might actually include justice. The ride took most of the day. By the time Cade reached the camp, the sun was dropping toward evening, and his body was reminding him that he hadn't eaten properly in 3 days, or slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in a week. He found Webb in the main tent, hunched over maps and documents, looking like a man who'd aged a decade in the few days since they'd talked on the road. Webb looked up, recognized Cade, and actually smiled. "Mercer, I heard about the bounty. Glad to see you're still breathing. For now. How are the families? Settled temporarily. We've got them in guest tents providing meals, basic necessities, but the situation's complicated. The company's investigating Hale's land acquisitions, and that process could take months." It won't take months. Hale signed an agreement to return the land or provide fair compensation. I've got his signature on paper. Webb's eyes widened. He actually agreed to that? Didn't have much choice. His options were running out. Can I see it? Cade pulled out the wanted poster, unfolded it, and showed Webb the handwritten agreement and Hale's signature. Webb studied it, read it twice, then laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You got Vernon Hale to sign a confession on your own wanted poster. I don't even know what to call that. I call it insurance, you call it evidence. Either way, it's leverage to make sure those families get what they're owed. Webb nodded slowly. I'll take this to my superiors. Push them to expedite the investigation. Use Hale's signature as admission of wrongdoing. It might actually work. It will work, because if it doesn't, I'll make sure everyone knows the railroad company protected a land thief at the expense of the families he victimized. That's not the kind of publicity corporations like. You're learning how this works. I'm a fast learner. Webb extended his hand, and this time the shake was genuine. The grip of someone who recognized an ally even if they'd started on opposite sides. What about you? Where do you go from here? Far from here. Somewhere the name Cade Mercer doesn't mean anything. Where wanted posters don't have my face, where I can maybe stop looking over my shoulder every 5 minutes. You earned that. More than earned it. Cade left the tent, walked to where the families were gathered around a cook fire, sharing a meal that looked humble but tasted like hope after weeks of uncertainty. Mrs. Garrett spotted him, stood, and approached with the kind of deliberate walk that said she had things to say. Mr. Mercer, she said, Mr. Webb told us what you did. Getting Hale to agree to return the land. Hale agreed because he didn't have a choice. Don't credit me with changing his heart. He doesn't have one. Still, you could have just left. Could have taken the easy road and let us fight our own battles. You didn't. That means something. Your husband would have done the same. He did do the same, which is why Hale had him killed. I just finished what he started. Mrs. Garrett's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. Thomas always said that one person standing up was worth more than 100 people staying silent. I think he'd be glad you were the one who stood. Cade didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and excused himself. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. It implied he'd done something noble instead of just refusing to walk away from something that was wrong. He found a quiet spot at the edge of camp, sat with his back against a rock, and watched the sun finish its descent. The sky turned colors that didn't have names, burning through oranges and purples before settling into the deep blue that preceded true darkness. Tomorrow he'd ride. Put miles between himself and this territory, between himself and the name he'd carried for too long. Maybe head to California, find work on a ranch where nobody asked questions about the past. Maybe just keep drifting until he found a place that felt different enough from everywhere else that he could pretend to start over. The mare grazed nearby, finally relaxed, finally believing they might actually rest instead of run. Cade closed his eyes, let exhaustion pull at him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he slept without his hand on his gun. 3 days later, word reached the camp that Vernon Hale had been arrested. Federal marshals, responding to Webb's official reports and the testimony of multiple families, had arrived at the ranch with warrants for fraud, murder conspiracy, and a list of other charges that would keep Hale in courtrooms for years. Cutler had turned witness, trading testimony for reduced charges, providing details about Garrett's murder and dozens of other crimes committed in Hale's name. The railroad company, desperate to distance itself from the scandal, had suspended all land acquisitions pending investigation and announced a fund to compensate families affected by fraudulent transactions. It wasn't perfect justice. It never was. But it was something, and something was more than the nothing those families had faced a week ago. Cade heard the news while saddling the mare, preparing to leave. Webb delivered it personally, looking tired but satisfied. "Thought you'd want to know," Webb said. "Hale's finished. He'll probably die in prison." "Good. The families are getting their land back. We're finalizing the paperwork now." "Also good. And the company's withdrawing the route from this corridor. Too much controversy, too much legal exposure. They're looking at alternatives 50 miles north." Cade paused in checking the cinch. "So all of this, the fighting, the bodies, the families displaced, it was for nothing? The railroad's not even coming?" "Not here, no. But that's not nothing, Mercer. That's those families getting to keep their lives, their land, their futures. That's Vernon Hale facing consequences instead of buying his way out. That's the system working, even if it took someone like you to force it. Cade finished with the saddle, ran his hand along the mare's neck. The system didn't work. One man stood up and got killed for it. Another man got lucky and survived long enough to make noise. That's not a system. That's chaos with occasional favorable outcomes. Maybe, but I'll take occasional favorable outcomes over guaranteed injustice. Fair enough. Webb pulled an envelope from his jacket, offered it to Cade. The company authorized a reward for bringing the fraud to light. It's not much, $500, but it's something. Cade looked at the envelope, didn't take it. Give it to the families. They need it more. Mercer, I didn't do this for money. I did it because walking away felt worse than staying. Don't complicate it with rewards. Webb nodded, tucked the envelope away. Where are you headed? Away. That's all I know. If you ever need work, need a reference, need anything, the railroad owes you. I owe you. Just send word. I appreciate that. But I'm done with this life. Done being the man people point guns at. Time to find out if I can be someone else. They shook hands one last time, and Cade mounted up. The mare was fresh, eager, ready to cover ground without the weight of pursuit driving her forward. Cade turned her north toward the border, toward territory he'd crossed a dozen times, but never with the feeling that maybe, possibly, he was riding toward something instead of away from it. The desert spread out before him, vast and indifferent, offering neither welcome nor warning. Just space, just distance, just the possibility that far enough could eventually become somewhere new. He rode through morning, through afternoon, through the slow fade into evening, made camp in a canyon that offered water and shelter, and the kind of privacy a man needed when he was trying to figure out who he'd be if he stopped being who he'd been. The fire burned low, pushing back darkness that felt less threatening than usual. Cade sat watching flames dance and thought about Thomas Garrett, about families displaced and reunited, about Vernon Hale sitting in a cell learning that money didn't buy freedom from consequences. He thought about the bodies at Lost Crossing, about Cutler's fear, about Vane's cold professionalism, about all the men who'd chosen violence as profession and how few of them lived long enough to regret it. And he thought about himself, a drifter with a gun, a wanted poster, and the stubborn refusal to walk away when walking away was the smart play. He'd never be a hero. Heroes didn't exist outside of stories people told themselves to feel better about the world. Real life was messier, compromised, built on choices between bad options and worse ones. But maybe, occasionally, a person could choose the bad option that helped someone else, could stand up when standing up cost something, could refuse to let powerful men crush powerless ones without at least making them work for it. It wasn't righteousness. It wasn't justice. It was just the bare minimum of human decency, applied in a place where decency was rare enough to be remarkable. And if that was all Cade Mercer ever amounted to, one man who said no when yes was easier, maybe that was enough. The fire burned down to coals. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama below. Somewhere, families were rebuilding lives on land they'd thought they'd lost forever. And somewhere else, far from here, there might be a place where a man could rest without reaching for his gun every time a branch snapped or a horse whinnied. Cade lay back, using his saddle as a pillow, and watched the sky until sleep found him. When he woke with the dawn, he broke camp, saddled the mare, and rode north into a future that was uncertain. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt like it might contain something other than the next fight. The desert had taught him many things over the years. How to read tracks, how to find water, how to stay alive when everything wanted you dead. But the most important lesson was simpler, harder, and more valuable than all the rest. Sometimes the right choice wasn't the safe one. Sometimes standing still was braver than running. And sometimes the only way to stop being hunted was to turn around and remind the hunters that their prey had teeth too. Vernon Hale had learned that lesson the hard way. So had Cutler, Vane, and every hired gun who'd thought Cade Mercer was just another target worth whatever the bounty promised. They'd been wrong, and their wrongness had cost them everything. Cade rode on, leaving the territory behind, carrying nothing but a horse, a gun, and the knowledge that he'd done what needed doing when it needed doing. It wasn't glory. It wasn't redemption. It was just a man choosing to be decent in a world that rarely rewarded decency. And in the end, that would have to be enough.